Well, hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffman coming at you. Just real quick, wanted to give you a little bit of heads up in terms of what's going on here, in terms of what we're covering today. Today we're going to be taking a look at taxation without representation, and this is topic 3.3 for APUSH. Now, when we were last here, we were talking about how there were numerous long-term causes as to what's going to be kind of laying the foundation for what will become eventually the American Revolution. But today we're going to be getting into a lot of the very, very clear, specific reasons, not long-term things that would allow a revolution to happen, but the specific grievances that are going to be pushing us in that very, very near future of the revolution itself. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the general feelings that you need to be aware of in terms of how British actions are going to be leading to specific colonial responses or reactions. Among those is that basically Britain believed that all of these policies that we're going to be getting into, they believed they were fair. They believed that they were justified and that they were needed. Remember, this is an empire that had spent a lot of money. A lot of British pounds were spent trying to defend these colonies in North America. And up to this point, the colonists had not paid any taxes in their defense. So what that means is that, Parliament's thinking, hey, you have been receiving colonists all of these benefits, but you have not been, really paying your fair share. And now it's time to pay that fair share in taxes. That being said, though, the colonists believed that the notion that Parliament would make the colonies pay taxes was a very big violation of the rights. Now, a lot of times, there's this misnomer that what the colonists were opposed to was just taxation in general, that the colonists were just a bunch of cheapskates that didn't want to pay their way, and that's not the case. There were principles with regards to their anger and rancor regarding these taxation policies that we're going to be getting into. Because, first off, the colonists were not, immune to taxation. They had a rich history of taxation, and it's taxes that they had applied to themselves. During this period of salutary neglect, these colonial legislatures had created taxes, but note, these were local taxes created by the local legislatures to be able to meet their needs, not imposed upon them from afar. And here's the other added issue to this, is that you are talking about adding taxes to people that do not have a say in those votes. Parliament is basically dropping these tax policies on the colonists, and the colonists have no say in the matter. And that's why, of course, this is going to be known by the quote, taxation without representation. The colonists had no legal authority to elect representatives to, to represent them in Parliament in London. Now, for many colonists, this is very obvious. You can't tax somebody ethically, morally, philosophically. You cannot tax people that do not have a say in the taxation decision-making process. But Britain would respond by saying, well, hold on, colonists, you are being represented. You are part of the greater British Empire. And when Parliament makes a decision, it isn't just thinking about London. It isn't just thinking about Wales. It isn't just thinking about, Yorkshire or something like that. It's thinking about the entire British Empire simultaneously. So if you are, concerned about, the morality of this taxation, well, you got to understand that, you are being virtually represented. Your needs are being considered by folks in Parliament. Even though you may not have chosen these folks, your needs are being considered. But of course, that's not going to be good enough, is it, for these for the colonists, for sure. This is going to be a matter of principle more than money. So that's a very important thing that you want to keep in mind. All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these particular policies that are going to get the colonists really really upset. And a lot of these new ideas and policies are going to be coming from this guy right here. This is Lord Grenville. Lord Grenville is going to be the exchequer to the crown. Basically, he's going to be what we would consider here in the United States to be the Treasury Secretary. So he was responsible for the finances of Britain at the time. And as we just mentioned, Britain was heavily in debt. The French Indian War, though it was a victory on the battlefield, it was a major problem financially, a major drain financially for Britain. And that, therefore, is going to, from the mindset of Grenville and many in Parliament, is going to necessitate that the colonies finally step up and pay their way, to stop being, in their minds, deadbeats and just receiving the benefits without taking on any of the financial responsibility. So let's get into some of these specific laws, specific policies that are going to be designed to save the empire, save the crown money. And the first of these is going to be the Sugar Act from 1764. Now note, this is happening just a year after the French Indian War ends. So it's almost a seamless transition from the French Indian War into these policies that are going to lead us right to revolution. As you can see here, this is going to be a tariff that's going to be imposed on foreign sugar that then the colonists are then going to have to pay. And note, this is not the first time that there have been, certain types of economic rules and policies that have been foisted upon the colonists. We are, familiar, of course, with the numerous navigation acts, but here's what's going to be changing. Whereas previously the navigation acts were mildly enforced, if at all, officials could easily be bribed, smuggling was pretty common. Now Parliament is putting its foot down and is going to be strictly enforcing these laws, which is what the colonists were not accustomed to. Remember, we used the metaphor in class of, imagine being a kid that, yes, you had parents, and yes, they technically were able to make rules for you, but those parents weren't around, and they didn't really have the opportunity to enforce them, and you would kind of learn as a child to kind of make your own rules and live by your own policies. And, this has gone on for a long time, and now you're a teenager, now you're in high school, and now, seemingly out of the blue, your parents are now much more involved in your life. And even though, yes, your parents have always had the ability to make rules, and they've made rules before, but now they're actually going to be around to enforce them. As you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of bitterness, there's going to be a lot of resentment, there's going to be a lot of anger with the idea of we've already learned to live a certain way, and now you're trying to control us out of the clear blue sky. And you can see how some of these rules are really going to be making these folks upset here in the colonies. For example, if you were in violation of some of these navigation acts, you could be arrested and then be forced to travel to admiralty courts in England to have your case be heard. So you could be someone that is in Massachusetts, you've been accused of violating the navigation acts, you're put on a boat, shipped, a couple months away to London, and then have your trial be heard by folks in London. Certainly not exactly a jury of your peers. In fact, there were no juries at all. These are royal courts that judges made decisions from up on high. In many respects, if you were accused of a crime, it felt like you were being, charged by an alien court somewhere. So this is going to be making a lot of folks upset, as you can imagine. Now, that being said, the Sugar Act mostly affected the wealthier colonists, so it wasn't as broad-based as you might think. But these policies are going to become more broad-based as we go along, starting with and including the Quartering Act in 1765. What this law is going to do is force colonists to have the privilege, if you will, to house and feed and, basically maintain royal troops in the colony. So it would be basically you'd get a knock on the door at your farm, and you would see an officer from the British Army, a redcoat there with a number of his troops, maybe a dozen guys, and you've been told that congratulations, you now get to house and feed and mend the torn uniforms of these soldiers at your expense. You are covering those costs. So that was certainly seen as an invasion for sure. This was so despised that we know that this is specifically addressed in the U.S. Constitution's Bill of Rights with the Third Amendment, which now bans quartering. Now, beyond the Quartering Act, we also saw probably what was going to be the most infamous of these early laws designed to raise revenue, and that is going to be the Stamp Act. Now, the Stamp Act is going to be very broad-based, whereas the Sugar Act really tended to affect the wealthier colonists. The Stamp Act is going to be seemingly affecting just about any colonist, particularly those living in urban areas. And what this was a tax on all legal documents. So if you wanted to get married, it was a tax on that. If you wanted to register, your child's birth certificate, that was a tax. Any kind of legal document was now going to have a tax that had to be paid on it. In addition, any kind of paper products that were going to be disseminated, like advertisements and newspapers. Those also had taxes applied to them. And so what this is going to be done is, and note, this is what's going to be different than the Sugar Act, where the Sugar Act tax was actually paid for by the producer of the product, the company that was actually selling you the sugar. It was not a separate tax that you paid out of your pocket, but it was included in the price of the product. This Stamp Act, you are paying out of pocket specifically yourself. You are applying that tax directly as you, the customer. You are paying that tax. So this is going to feel much more personal. There's going to be a much more visceral sense of anger. And once again, this is coming from Parliament. This is not coming from local colonial legislatures. This is coming from Parliament. And this is going to be seen as tyrannical. You're going to be seeing, many of these colonial leaders across the continent, people like Patrick Henry here, who goes on to eventually deliver the 1775 famous, give me liberty or give me death speech, talking about these are not just policies designed to raise money. In the minds of the colonists, these are rights that are clearly being violated by these laws. This is a matter of principle. These are folks that have been raised on the Enlightenment, raised on John Locke. These are folks that believe in natural rights. They believe that government exists to protect our rights. And it seems clearly by some of these policies that the government is doing the opposite. It is actually violating our rights. Now, to, talk about, this issue, one might think, oh, maybe there's just a few isolated folks that were, kind of upset about it. But actually, we see the formation of something called the Stamp Act Congress that is going to be designed to bring some of these leaders together from across the colonies to talk about their shared grievances. Once again, when you unify in common cause on some issue previously, it makes it easier to come together for future issues. Remember, these are folks that had come together for the Albany Congress to fend off the French and the natives. Now you're talking about trying to defend yourself against a violation of rights from Parliament via the Stamp Act. Now, no, it's not just going to be wealthy colonial leaders that are going to be sitting in, meeting houses to kind of talk about how they're going to organize and try to, work together to defend their rights. You also saw a blue-collar movement that would emerge in America, particularly in Boston, with the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty in particular were, pretty infamous. They were a pretty rowdy bunch that did not use, highfalutin talk, so to speak, to try to get their point across. They used straight up, lack for a better term, gangster tactics to get it done, using fear, intimidation, violence, all those kinds of things to try to send a message, including, infamously going after tax collectors. As you can see in this image, this is a poor tax collector that has been beaten up, stripped naked, tarred and feathered, and now being forced to swallow tea. Now, eventually tea is going to be a major area of concern regarding taxation. And you can see here, threats of, hanging people by liberty trees. And, this is pretty scary, intimidating stuff. And this is just some dude doing his job. But nonetheless, for many of these colonists, the tax collector was the embodiment, the personification, if you will, of government tyranny being handed down from London. So you're seeing a couple of different ways that the colonists are responding, be it through, kind of upper crust speeches, and working class violence. In addition to this, we're going to be seeing the organized attempts to boycott British goods. The idea being it is the buying of these goods that is allowing Parliament to make the money off of the violation of our rights. And so the desire was to then make homespun goods. In other words, the stuff that you can make on your own can't be taxed. So the more that you can make on your own, the less that you can enable British tyranny. In fact, the reaction to the Stamp Act was so visceral, it was so loud, it was so rancorous, that London pretty much quickly got the message that they realized this is not going to work, and they repealed the Stamp Act. But note, just like a parent's going to, maybe, ease up on a curfew, London is going to be saying, Parliament's going to be saying, listen, all right, we're going to do away with this law, but we still are your parents. We still have the ability to make rules, and don't you forget that. And that is the purpose of what the Declaratory Act is. The Declaratory Act is basically saying, listen, yes, we've repealed the Stamp Act, but we still reserve the right to make laws that affect you. We are still, in essence, your political parents, and you will be expected to comply with those policies that may get created in the future, which many more are going to be created right around the corner. All right, so that does it there, getting us a little introduction into the policies that leads to revolution. When we come back, we'll talk about the Townsend Acts and some other policies that are not also going to be very popular. Until next time, we'll see you. Bye-bye.